Power does not begin with thunder. It begins in silence, in the private moments where a man confronts himself, long before the world gives him a name to live up to. Before he was feared as something beyond human, Sango was exactly that, human. A man of presence, of energy, of undeniable force. He did not need a crown to command attention. It was in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way others adjusted themselves the moment he entered a space. Charisma is often mistaken for charm, but in Sango, it carried weight. It pulled people in, held them there, and reminded them, without a single word, who stood before them. He was powerful, yes, but power alone does not create fear. It is how that power is expressed that defines its impact. And Sango expressed his without hesitation. Those closest to him saw it first. The speed of his reactions, the intensity of his emotions. There was no gradual escalation, no measured build. When anger came, it arrived fully formed, immediate, absolute. It did not ask for permission, and it did not wait for consequence. At first, it was interpreted as strength. A ruler who does not tolerate weakness. A king who enforces order without delay. In a kingdom like Oyo, such traits could be seen as necessary, qualities that ensured stability, that reinforced authority. But strength, when pushed beyond its limit, begins to change form. And in Sango, that shift was becoming harder to ignore. He was not a distant ruler insulated by ceremony. He was present, deeply involved in the affairs of his court, his military, his household. He demanded proximity, demanded awareness, demanded control. Nothing around him existed outside his influence for long. Control was not a preference. It was an expectation. Every decision, every movement, every interaction, he needed to feel it was within his reach. And when it wasn't, something inside him resisted. Something reacted. This is where the man begins to fracture. Because control, when pursued without limit, creates tension not just with others, but within the self. Those who lived closest to Sango understood this tension in ways the outside world never could. His wives, bound not only by union but by proximity to his most unguarded moments, witnessed both sides of him, the commanding ruler and the man beneath the title. Among them, one presence stands out. Oya. She is not passive. She does not exist in the background of his story. Oya is forceful, perceptive, deeply attuned to the shifts in Sango's nature. Where others might retreat, she observes. Where others might remain silent, she understands. Their connection is not simple, it is charged, layered, defined by both alignment and tension. Because to stand beside Sango is to stand near something that does not remain constant. And Oya sees that clearly. She sees the moments where his control tightens, where his reactions sharpen, where the line between authority and excess begins to blur. She sees the man as he is, not as the kingdom imagines him to be. But even understanding has limits. Beyond the palace, within the inner circle of generals and advisors, the atmosphere reflects a similar awareness. These are men who have fought beside him, who have witnessed his leadership in its most decisive form. They respect him, they follow him, but they do so with precision, with caution, with an unspoken understanding that proximity requires discipline. Because Sango does not tolerate deviation. Not in strategy, not in loyalty, not in outcome. And when those expectations are not met, the response is not mild. It is immediate. It is forceful. It leaves no ambiguity about where authority resides. At first, this reinforces his dominance. It solidifies his image as a ruler who cannot be challenged, who cannot be undermined. But over time, a different effect begins to take hold. Distance. Not physical distance, but emotional, psychological. A space forms between Sango and those around him, created not by lack of respect, but by the weight of his presence. Conversations become measured. Reactions become calculated. Authenticity gives way to caution, and in that space, isolation begins. This is the internal conflict that defines him. Not a battle against enemies, but a struggle within himself. Man versus self, because the same qualities that elevate him, his intensity, his certainty, his refusal to hesitate, are the very qualities that begin to erode his control. His temper is no longer just a trait. It is becoming a force, one that does not always align with reason, one that does not always stop when it should. There are moments, brief but significant, where even Sango seems aware of it, where the aftermath of his actions lingers longer than expected, where silence replaces reaction, where something unspoken hangs in the air, unresolved. But awareness does not equal restraint, and restraint is what he lacks most. Because once power reaches a certain threshold, it stops being questioned, especially by the one who holds it. To Sango, his actions are justified, necessary, an extension of his role, his responsibility, his authority. And in many cases, they are. That is what makes the conflict so difficult to confront. Because the line between necessity and excess is not always visible in the moment. It is only visible in what follows. And what follows is beginning to change. The reactions of those around him, the tension within his court, the quiet observations of those who know him best. These are not isolated details. They are indicators, signals that something within Sango is shifting, growing stronger, less contained, harder to manage. But there is no intervention, no correction, because who challenges a king? Who questions a man whose authority is absolute? This is how the transformation begins, not through a single event, but through accumulation, through repetition, through the gradual reinforcement of behavior that goes unchecked. And as this continues, the distinction between who Sango is and what he is becoming begins to fade. Power didn't change Sango, it revealed him. There is a moment in every story where power stops being a tool and starts becoming an obsession. For Sango, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It built itself slowly, quietly, in the spaces between victory and silence, in the aftermath of decisions that left no room for opposition, in the growing realization that authority alone was no longer enough. Because once a man has mastered control over people, the next question becomes unavoidable. What else can he control? It begins with fascination. Fire, not as a simple element but as something alive, something that consumes, transforms, responds. Sango does not observe it casually. He studies it, watches how it moves, how it spreads, how it refuses to be contained once it reaches a certain point. Fire does not negotiate. It does not hesitate. It acts. And in that behavior, there is something familiar, something that mirrors him. Then comes thunder. Not just the sound, but the force behind it. The sudden crack across the sky, the way it commands attention, the way it silences everything beneath it for a fraction of time. Thunder does not ask to be heard. It demands it. It arrives without warning, leaves an impact, and disappears, unquestioned, undeniable. To most, these are natural phenomena. To Sango, they are something else entirely. Possibility. This is where the shift begins. Because fascination, when combined with power, does not remain passive. It seeks expression. It seeks ownership. Within the palace, within the court, within the quiet spaces where observation turns into intent, Sango's focus changes. His attention moves beyond governance, beyond warfare, beyond the responsibilities that once defined him. There is something else now, something that pulls his focus toward forces that cannot be commanded through traditional means. And yet, he does not step back. He leans in. This is where the first whispers begin. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss. Stories shared in low tones, carried between servants, soldiers, observers who are not meant to speak but cannot ignore what they have seen. They speak of moments where Sango's presence aligns too closely with the elements he studies. Moments where the boundary between coincidence and intention becomes difficult to define. Lightning striking where he stands. Thunder following his voice. Fire responding not just to fuel, but to proximity. At first, these accounts are treated as exaggeration, the natural result of fear mixed with admiration. A powerful king inspires powerful stories. That is expected. That is normal. But then the stories begin to repeat. Different voices, different locations, the same pattern, and repetition changes perception. Because once something is heard enough times, it stops sounding like imagination and starts sounding like possibility. This is the moment where admiration begins to transform. The people of Oyo have always respected Sango. They have always feared him to a degree. But this is different. This is not fear of authority. This is something deeper, something that touches on the unknown. Because if these accounts are true, if even a fraction of them holds weight, then Sango is no longer operating within the limits of a man. And that realization introduces a new kind of tension. Within the court, reactions shift. Advisors who once focused on strategy now find themselves navigating uncertainty. Generals who once followed commands without hesitation begin to observe more closely, measuring not just the orders they receive, but the presence behind them. Even within his inner circle, where loyalty is strongest, there is a quiet adjustment. A recognition that something is changing, not just in reputation, but in reality. And Sango feels it. He senses the shift, the way attention around him has evolved. The way silence lingers longer. The way respect carries a different weight. And instead of resisting it, he accepts it. Because this aligns with something deeper within him. The need not just to rule, but to dominate. Not just physically, not just politically, but absolutely. This is where fascination becomes pursuit. Because if power exists beyond the human realm, then it can be reached. And if it can be reached, it can be controlled. Or so it seems. The rituals grow more intense. The focus sharper. The distance between Sango and the ordinary world widens. He is still king, still present, still commanding, but there is a separation now. A sense that part of him is operating on a different level, one that others cannot fully access or understand. And with that separation comes isolation. Because power at this scale does not allow for equals. Only observers. Only witnesses. Only those who stand close enough to feel its impact, but never close enough to share it. This is the conflict that defines this phase of his story. Man versus power. Not power as a title, not power as authority, but power as a force. Something external, something unpredictable, something that does not belong to anyone, and yet, in Sango's mind, can be claimed. The danger here is not immediate. It does not announce itself. It builds through belief, through repetition, through the gradual merging of identity and ability. Because once a man begins to see himself as more than human, the limits that once restrained him begin to disappear. And when limits disappear, consequences change. There are moments now, clear, undeniable, where Sango's connection to these forces is no longer questioned. Displays that cannot be easily explained. Events that move beyond coincidence into something more direct, more intentional. And the reaction is immediate. Fear. Not admiration layered with respect. Fear without reassurance. Because the same force that inspires awe can destroy without distinction. And now that possibility is no longer theoretical. It is present. It is visible. It is real. The people begin to understand that what they are witnessing is no longer just a powerful king exploring the boundaries of his influence. It is something else entirely. Something that does not follow the same rules. Something that cannot be predicted, contained, or easily controlled. And once that understanding takes hold, everything changes. Because fear, once it reaches a certain point, does not remain quiet. It spreads. It shapes perception. It rewrites reality. And in Sango's case, it begins to redefine him. No longer just a ruler, no longer just a man, but something that stands between the two, unstable, expanding, and increasingly difficult to separate from the force it seeks to command. And then, something happens. Something that shifts everything from tension to crisis. Because there is a difference between fear and terror. And whatever occurred in that moment erased that difference completely. But then, something happened that turned fear into terror. History survives because someone chooses to remember. Across Africa, entire kingdoms rose and fell. Great rulers changed the course of nations. Warriors, scholars, inventors, queens, and visionaries shaped civilizations whose stories deserve to be told with accuracy, depth, and respect. Yet many of these stories remain unknown. Some have been forgotten. Others have been reduced to a few sentences when they deserve entire chapters. That is why Oyo Archives exists. Every video on this channel is part of a larger mission to uncover the people, empires, traditions, victories, mysteries, and turning points that helped shape Yoruba history and the history of Africa itself. If you believe these stories deserve to reach more people, take a moment to support this work. Click the like button. It tells YouTube that these histories matter. Share this video with friends, family, students, and anyone interested in learning about Africa beyond the versions often found in textbooks. And if you are passionate about discovering the untold stories of our past, subscribe to Oyo Archives and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Every like helps preserve history. Every share helps spread knowledge. Every subscription helps bring more forgotten stories back into the light. The archives are vast, and we are only beginning the journey. Subscribe now, and together, let us continue exploring the remarkable history, legends, empires, and cultural heritage of the Yoruba people and the African continent. This is Oyo Archives, where history is remembered, preserved, and brought to life.